Welcome, everybody. My name is Rebecca Lurie, and here we are at the NCBA Impact Conference, which is in October 6th. But let me say right now, today is September 18th, and we are recording this 18 days before the run of show. So if anything big happened in the news between now and then, good blessings to everybody. We are in some hard times. In the news today has been the wildfires on the West Coast, and hurricane with the letter S in mid-September. So that's a little bit of our news. Black Lives Matter, and here we are. I'm going to begin just by introducing some of the facts here that we are recording this, and it's a pre-recorded session, but what is very active is the chat and the questions and answer page. So I want to welcome participants to chat with each other in the chat. And if you have particular questions for the members of the panel, we will answer them in the Q&A feature. We won't be answering anything live because although we are doing some kind of time travel, we can't quite do that much time travel. So we'll do as much as we can in this way of two places at once. So here we are porting ourselves from September 18th to October 6th, and transporter on, and we have arrived. Going to do a screen share and a small presentation to frame this conversation before we move with our speakers. Diversity in how people learn, how we deliver, skills, knowledge, and values. What will follow in this workshop are 6 perspectives. A quote from Paulo Freire: "Liberating education consists in acts of cognition, not transfers of information." Paulo Freire was a leader in popular education, and he understood that the full human being can be more fully expressed and recognized and even liberated when what they know is met with full respect and partnership in a learning experience. The 5th principle of co-ops is education, training, and information. Many people here may be familiar with the 7 principles. What I would say about the 7 principles of co-ops, with the 5th being that of education and training, is that all the others get more fully fulfilled when you have education strengthening the capacity. Take, for example, members' economic participation. Once members understand how to read a balance sheet and the cash flow in an operation and what we mean by reserves, they can begin to more fully participate in that aspect of the business. And education can enliven all these different aspects of members' participation. There are 3 competencies to running an effective cooperative entity. I'd like to say the heart, the hands, and the globe. In this model, the heart is all the things that bring the people into the fold. What I might say, love, humanity, care. And when we are able to listen and pay attention to the people who are in the business. The operation is all the things that a subject matter expert might know about how to make the things this company makes or does, but also the financial dealings and the management. Again, understanding the cash flow and how earnings happen. And the last piece about the globe is understanding the political context of the business, the industry, and the sector, and understanding what regulation, legislation, policy may matter, and what we mean when we think about sustainability in a larger global context. And there are 3 areas of learning and teaching for people to get better at what they do. They need knowledge, skills, and values. We may all agree at the value of cooperation. The skills to make that work and the knowledge of how we get there are more aspects of the things that we would teach to make a stronger co-op. Multiple intelligences is a very important way to think about diversity as well. Everybody comes to a learning experience, to a work experience with different strengths of how they take in information. Once we are aware of multiple intelligences, we can change and adapt different ways we share information so that everybody can be learning and doing more. There's a way to think of it as the ways people learn, there's more retention rate when they do more with the new knowledge. Giving somebody a handout and say, read this, or telling them where to go on YouTube to say, watch this, is not the same as offering an experience of doing together, where that experience gets them wiser on the doing. And when people have to teach other people, like colleagues might teach colleagues, or we might teach each other from our learned experience, that is where higher retention rate occurs. And how people arrive to learning. It may be on the job, a little bit of what you need to do this project better, but it may be going to workshops, maybe as high up as higher education. Indeed, people can learn on the job. There can be workshops that people go to on their own time or company time. Folks can join academies and learn in cohorts. Union Training Fund may have some ways people can learn more about what's happening in their industry. Professional and workforce development, where people are sent away or consultants are brought in, and the university. In our workshop today, we're going to hear from six speakers who are going to bring different perspectives. Omar Friella from Green Worker Cooperatives, Erin Hancock from St. Mary's University, Rebecca Bowen from Democracy at Work Institute, Stacy Sutton, University of Illinois at Chicago, Felix Cardon, Catechol Interpreters Co-op and the New York City Network of Worker Co-ops, and Neil Gladstein, International Association of Machinists. I will be your host, Rebecca Lurie, with the City University of New York, the School of Labor and Urban Studies, and the Community and Worker Ownership Project. Now remember, we did pre-record this presentation, but behind the scenes in the chat and the Q&A, we are there in real time present, and we will answer any questions and converse with folks in the chat and in the Q&A that you can pose to any of us as we go on with our workshop. Thank you. So my early question to each of you is to introduce yourself. And when you do that, what kind of training do you deliver? And how do people typically find their way to you? And Omar, we'll begin with you. And you're muted.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. So hello, everyone. My name is Omar Freya. I'm the founder and executive director at Green Worker Cooperatives. We are a 16-year-old cooperative development organization based in the Bronx. We're the oldest co-op development organization in New York City and focus on Black and Indigenous people of color. And so what we do is we help people to start up worker cooperatives. And the approach that we take is we've been pioneers in what's come to be known as the academy model or approach to worker cooperative development. We created the Co-op Academy back in 2006, so about 14 years, pretty early into our work, with the idea that people themselves need to be in the driver's seat of starting their own cooperatives. And so the approach, or that's our approach, the approach that we take. And people come to us basically because they want to. These are people who come to us from our community. We're based in the Bronx. We primarily recruit from the Bronx, though we get people from all over New York City. Overwhelmingly people of color, and particularly women, so women of color. And people are coming to us because they want to do good. They want to create businesses because they have a vision and a dream, but they want to do it in a way that really relies on team, that has team present, and that they are not the bosses that they have grown up with, that they've worked with. They want to be something different. So those are people that are coming to us, and our focus is also on being green, and that brings for anyone across the spectrum in any kind of business. We get people who, regardless of what the industry is, they want to do it in a way that's a contribution to the community that they're a part of, and the contribution to the planet. So people are coming to us because we're out knocking on doors, we're flyering, we're spreading the word. We do tons of events all the time that are really about creating awareness and consciousness that there is something beyond the capitalist approach to structuring a business. And so people get excited about that, and word eventually spreads out that there's a way of creating those kinds of businesses. So that's how people are coming to us.
Thank you, Omar. And I'm going to invite Erin Hancock to introduce herself.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Omar. So I'm Erin, coming to you all from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. I work with the International Centre for Cooperative Management, which is this sort of hub of innovative thought, I'd like to say, within our business school at St. Mary's. And so we're very lucky that in the early 2000s, the sector was really across the world having this conversation saying, we're doing this thing, which is investing in people going to get MBAs. And we expect them to lead our cooperatives correctly. Yet in their MBA programs, they don't learn about co-ops. So then they come back with all these good ideas that end up driving co-ops kind of off track and looking more like a capitalist firm. And so the conversation continued to, could we create a co-op MBA? Is that a thing we could all do? And so it was actually the sector, mostly from Canada, the US, and the UK, that said, all right, let's gather a pot of money together, shop this around to business schools and see who wants to take us up on this idea. So it actually is an international center. It's an international program in terms of the cases, the students, the instructors, but it is based out of Canada. And so back in 2003, we had our first cohort. Now, this is a mouthful. We call it the MMCCU for short, the Master of Management Cooperatives and Credit Unions. And all that information is on our website there at managementstudies.coop. But over the years, we've evolved that to also offer a half master's program. This is all part-time online, so people around the world can participate in English while they're still working, so not having to step back from their career to further their education. And it's not just like an MBA program with a side of co-ops. It comes through everything in all of the courses. So it's pretty intensive and exciting that way. And also, all the peers in the program are from the co-op sector, all different industries and also ownership model types. So, and then we've added in executive education. So at this NCBA conference, some of the people here in this session may have already attended our executive education online in partnership with NCBA. We do international study tours to Spain, Italy, Cuba, Croatia to visit their cooperative economies. And with symposia, conferences, free webinars, resources and research. So a lot happening out of St. Mary's. Thanks.
Excellent. I'm going to ask to pitch it next to Felix. Felix Cardon. You're muted.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing? I'm Felix Gardon, and I am previously from Queers for Economic Justice, and right now I'm with the Training Collective in NICNOC, which is the New York Worker Owners Collective, and we're working on cooperatives right now, and also previously from Caracol Interpreters Co-op. So a lot of the approach that we have been doing and the work that we do is not only based on this concept of diversity, but it's how to integrate people into doing education and self-education, and also understanding a lot of the knowledge and value that community brings into this work already.
So I'm going to ask you to adjust your mic. It's hard to hear you.
Okay. So much better now? Good. So we're actually doing the trainings and the work from the perspective of people that are already working in the field, presenting a series of sessions from people that have run co-ops or already have worked in co-ops, and taking it from that perspective to build up from that knowledge base and understanding diversity differently. And one of the big things that we have acknowledged, and I want to make sure that we understand, is the piece of language justice. Understanding right now that when we work only in one language, it's really difficult to incorporate communities that need this information. Right now, understanding that many of the communities that need this kind of resources not only speak English, but have learned in other languages and have different values and processes to do that. So that's really important of part of the work that we do. Understanding also capacities and disabilities and how you work with adults that have different abilities, integrating that. And the way that we do that is because we work within the co-op world here in New York, and we have access to other co-op members and persons that are creating this kind of business and bring that perspective. So we continue to do that by integrating them and also becoming teachers and training from their perspective about the tools that are presented out in the co-op world to develop that sometimes don't fit every co-op, and how they can actually help and adjust themselves and promote self-education within their work.
Thanks. I am going to pass it to Rebecca Bowen.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. My work at the Democracy at Work Institute is Education and Training Director. I've been involved in education for ownership for a long time. Prior to that, I helped set up a literacy program and was involved in leadership development at the Highlander Center, where I got to study with Paulo Freire and Miles Horton and Frank Adams. I feel like I'm trying to bring forward some of what I've learned from mentors into the cooperative, particularly worker cooperative field today. The Democracy at Work Institute's mission is to expand worker ownership to communities that are most impacted by economic and social inequalities. And the education and training program has been one where we have been both developing cohorts of cooperative developers and community organizers that are interested in worker ownership, as well as doing education with cooperative members, with managers, and with people in the field who aren't as familiar, or people outside the field who aren't as familiar with worker ownership. In 2018, we started the School for Democratic Management specifically to help co-ops succeed as co-ops, with a focus on specific and practical tools that people could learn and put into practice in their workplace. So it's like a professional development opportunity for those who are working, who can, and those who are not, but who can plug in and learn some specific applicable tools. So our primary focus has been people who have been working in conventional companies who are transitioning their companies to worker ownership. So people in the conversion process, and they come to us through our capital providers. There are people who are existing managers of worker co-ops. They learn about us through the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, our sister organization. And then there are also TA providers and cooperative developers who learn about our work through DOWI and through others. But we have a primary focus on management, a primary focus on people who are currently asking questions about how to manage in a more participatory way. So thank you.
Stacy.
Thank you. So I'm Stacy Sutton, and I'm a professor of urban planning and policy at the University of Illinois, Chicago, where I teach a course on the solidarity economy. That's perhaps the most direct way in which I engage master's students who are interested in thinking about community economic development and engaging alternative models. Most of the folks that I reach through that course and through my other courses are not particularly familiar with cooperatives. So I actually see that as a pipeline for kind of building public awareness about cooperatives. So those of you who are familiar with urban planning and policy, many of our students go into city government, municipal. They become municipal leaders, or they work in community organizations. So I firmly believe that if the degree to which I can help them understand the value of cooperatives, the value of cooperation, the value of solidarity, and the benefits of economic democracy, that they then bring that to the work that they're doing, and that helps create an enabling environment for all the work that we're doing. And I also work with municipal governments directly in terms of knowledge sharing and doing different research projects for governments that are interested in thinking about cooperative ownership. I guess I'll stop there and turn it over to Neil.
Hi, everyone. I'm Neil Gladstein. Until recently, I was a director of strategic resources for the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. We're a 130-year-old union with over 400,000 members in both the US and Canada. Most of our members are in manufacturing or transportation. We also have a lot of workers in the service sector, forestry sector, and government employees. Starting in 2012, we began organizing lobstermen in Maine. These men and women mostly live in small rural port towns and islands and are truly self-employed. Most of them own their own boats. Our members now run a marketing co-op called Lobster 207. It also sells, it's primarily wholesale, but also sells directly to households through online ordering. Initially, our training was focused on the activist lobstermen who are leading the unionizing effort. We work to give them the various tools that they need in our traditional sort of adult education. A lot of it took place. We have a residential training center down in Maryland, the Wimpensingher Center, and these are very hands-on classes with lots of discussion and participation. Skills we help people learn about and work around involve coming up with strategies, communications, how you organize, dealing with politics and regulations, how their industry works beyond their role in it of catching the lobsters and selling to the dock, and also why a co-op model makes sense for what they're trying to do. For the more general membership, most of the things take place at meetings where we talk about things like how do you run a union, local, and a co-op. They're technically separate entities, but from the members' perspective, the two things kind of function together. A lot of our training revolves around politics, why politics matters, lobbying, building coalitions. In 2017, when we actually bought an existing wholesale business, we had a lot of education about why we're doing what we're doing. The membership had to approve the buyout, they had to approve the loans related to the buyout, all the structure. And that, so it's very adult education driven. We also do, for our members, a lot of things we do with any of our other members where they can take classes at our training center around why union's important, politics, and we do a lot of training at meetings around best practices in the industry and what's going on at the co-op.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, everybody. By way of introducing myself, I'll spend a moment and then turn it back over to the panel. I'm at the City University of New York at the School of Labor and Urban Studies, where we have designed and are running a project called Community and Worker Ownership Project, where we understand there are multiple ways people come to learn, which is why I really was excited to propose and design this workshop as a way to explain what we're already thinking about at the university. The university has 500,000 students in New York City, and half of those people are actually in a continuing ed space or worker or professional development space, not a full-time worker, a full-time student. At our school, we actually educate a lot of workers. People come part-time, maybe one night a week, or maybe there's a workshop we bring to their union or to their community organization. So we're looking at all these different ways we might bring cooperative education out into the world and at the City University, but also all over, speaking to all of you. I like to think there's no wrong way, there's no wrong door, that building an ecosystem to expand cooperation needs to happen every place. It can be happening in nursery schools, how we begin to function together. But I want to turn now, actually, well, let me pause and say for the audience in real time in October, please put questions in the chat or to the Q&A to the speakers as this goes. And let us hear what you're thinking, what your experiences are, where you may predominantly teach and learn. And we do have a tab where you can get all the resources that we'll be offering from our different shops, so to speak. I loved hearing and thinking that as specific as going to the Bronx with a small cohort to coming from anywhere in the world online is the range, part of the range, the geographic range. Zoom has certainly, or I should say the pandemic and this very quick shift in our societal norms to be able to show up almost anywhere quickly is a very interesting phenomena that we may touch on. It wasn't scheduled as part of our talk, but it also changes how people show up. So it'd be very interesting for us to think and look, and if we did this a year from now, with so much hindsight, we would see how much even what we're doing has changed. But we're really in the midst of that change. I want to turn to, I'm not going to go to the slides because that can be hard, but the slide I shared, Heart, Hands, and Globe, is meant as a meme that you can quickly grab. So that meme is meant to say there are different ways people need, an entity needs to be present to make their company function well, or their entity to do well, both for the people and for the planet and for the thing that they're producing. So what I'm now going to ask is, from any of your vantage points, what competencies do you most focus on when it comes to the heart, which is teaching people how to work with people in a really compassionate and loving way, I want to say, because I think that's part of what's before us in this 21st century, is to bring forth that fundamental competency of care for one another. And then that one of the hands, do you teach people how to read the books, run the finances, make the widgets? My first teaching experience was teaching carpenters how to do carpentry with the Carpenters Union, and I was teaching people how to handle hammers. So that was a competency that we need to teach in any company. And how do we do that if you do that in your work? And the third one, being the globe, is really supposed to illustrate what I think Neil referenced with the machinists, is teaching people how to be aware of their political economy, regulation, legislation, politics, and play a role in that. So, some of the most successful companies in the world have a lot of lobbyists, unfortunately, or fortunately. How do we think in that way? So let me pitch it, maybe offer who would like to go first, and see if anybody would like to be the first speaker.
Maybe I'll jump in on that.
Thank you.
Sure. So, I like that framing. For us, I think of, we begin, I'll say across the board, that we focus on all three. So the heart, the hands, and the globe. I'd say we initially, initial thinking was around operations and how to get people to a place where they're building out the operations of this business and really laying it out, because our focus is on actually doing it. So people are actually creating their cooperative in the process while they're in our co-op academy, and then we continue to work with them from there. And so within that, though, we inevitably build out, and we bring in a context, understanding and awareness of the racial, the class politics that we live under, the environmental status of the world, and just the systems that lead to more degradation and pollution and all of that. But even underneath all of that, and what for me is really the core, is that heart, what you call the heart piece, but really getting people to a place where first they know themselves as a person, and what's the baggage that you're bringing into this co-op, and then to know each other. So how are we actually going to be able to work together without killing each other? And since we're actually creating a business, to know your customers, because if you don't know your customers, then you don't have a viable business model. And you're gonna hit walls very quickly and burn through a lot of money. So really knowing yourself, knowing your customers, knowing yourself, knowing each other, and knowing your customers, fits within that heart piece of, how do we relate to ourselves and other people, including the customers, because we are building a business.
I'll jump in. I have I think that frame is really useful, and because I approach it slightly differently, in the sense that I begin with the heart, because I'm not necessarily reaching people who are starting cooperatives immediately, but rather sensitizing people, building awareness of cooperatives, and normalizing that as a business, as a model that we should be replicating, right? So the degree to which I'm working with urban planning and policy students and other students at UIC, I think the goal is really to move their thinking in terms of the alternatives within our economy, right? There is not just one way of thinking within a capitalist frame, that we are actually moving toward a more radical set of alternatives. And then from there, I think that's connected to the political context, right? Because you have to contextualize like why this is so essential, why economic democracy, especially now, why solidarity, especially now, is important in our cities, in our regions, right? And they see that, and so people can connect to that. But again, that becomes very theoretical, right? So in urban planning, what's a little different for urban planning relative to some other disciplines is we're a discipline that is about theory and practice. And so we bring those together, and I do in the classroom by developing, like doing feasibility studies for actual cooperatives, or doing feasibility studies or plans for organizations that are interested in starting cooperatives. And in that way, students both can think about all of the texts, but then apply the technical skills. And in doing that, they're also building the empathy. They're building an understanding that these are viable businesses. These are strong businesses. And they're using both their visualization, analytical, and theoretical skills to produce a product for an organization that can then use that for whatever they need to use it for funding or what have you. So we kind of approach it slightly differently, starting with the people, or I do, and then the political, and then operations.
I can follow Stacey.
Open it up. Erin?
Sure. So, I think that one of the challenges probably we all face in our work is running a cooperative and building cooperatives are complex. Why? Because when people talk about running businesses, we talk about one bottom line, and cooperatives don't exactly answer to that one bottom line that a lot of other people are answering to. So that means that the complexity is sometimes a full stop for people. So I would say that, the focus in our work at St. Mary's and all the different types of education that we do is building a fluency for people in the co-op business model, so that they then have the confidence and the competence to be able to run with that in all of their decision-making, governance, people management, all the way down to marketing and how you even track your accounting and success metrics. I mean, if we're borrowing those types of things from non-cooperatives, we start drifting and merging into what looks like a non-cooperative. In Canada this week, we saw a very unfortunate thing happen because of this. The REI equivalent in Canada, NEC, owned by millions of members, the board had voted this week to sell off all of the assets of that cooperative to a US investment firm with no consultation of members. So it's a very wild time for co-ops here, but what it's been raising in our conversations is that when you're treating your business without a member first approach, it drives everything else that you do. You measure success differently, you lead differently, you make financial decisions differently, you allocate your resources and time and focus in each of your departments differently. So we know that shows up in all areas of business. So that's what we try to address in this sort of alternative to an MBA type of program. But digging into things like people management, that's got to look different. How do we integrate the principles and values, bring that from complexity to clarity? And then how do we look at sister movements and other folks that are really working toward a just economy and work in alignment with those? Because thankfully, co-ops are not the only sort of initiatives and movements that are saying there's something maybe wrong with our society and planet. So how are we looking to them in solidarity to move good things for the planet forward? Yeah, so at the end of the day, we want to make it easy to run cooperatives and to make all that complexity clear. Thanks.
Neil.
Hi. Thinking about your model, we actually do a lot of training around the heart, but it's all through experience, because that's not the sort of thing we can really tell people and change their minds. Where lobstermen, the men and women mostly, they live in isolated communities. They're very self-reliant, and historically they're very distrustful, because basically anyone with any power, whether it's political or economics, has lied to them and stabbed them in the back. So when we first started approaching them, they were very wary about why would a union want to help us, and we actually had to, through their whole experience, show them, change their heart, so to speak. And the whole concept of solidarity, whether it's with their fellow lobstermen, whether it's other people within the machinists, whether it's other people in the labor movement, whether it's working with other environmental and other groups. So that's all, the heart training has really been just through experience. What we focus mostly on is the globe. The industry, fishing, is very heavily regulated, but people don't really understand how they're regulated. The industry itself is very secretive. You can't go to a bookstore and find the book that tells you this is how the lobster industry works. It's, you know, there's lots of picture books about pots and lobsters, but we probably have a better understanding of how the industry works than pretty much anyone else now, because we've just been studying it now. So a lot of our training is, how do they, is a lobsterman out in a boat in the middle of the ocean, how do they fit into this bigger picture of the political and economic system, and how the co-op is a way for them to have, the co-op and the union is a way for them to have power both within their industry and within the whole legislative body. And because of all of our successes, it just keeps on building upon itself, where people have experiences where they see they have power, and it encourages them and it builds upon itself. For our executive board, it's made up of lobstermen, so they've all been running their own little tiny business, but there's been a lot of sort of training, hands-on stuff like understanding the financial documents, understanding the relationship between executive board and the CEO, how the executive board can't micromanage the company. All those sorts of things they're important for any sort of business, and we've been doing some of that, but that's mostly focused on the activists who are on the executive board. That's kind of a quick overview.
I can go.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Okay, thanks. So I would say that in the School for Democratic Management, we're really focusing on the hands part, that it's really about operations. And it's meant to bridge the gap that often happens between management training and actual practical application. So we're really focused on skills and tools, if you will, or worksheets that people can learn something and then go into their workplace and have ready to apply. So a lot of examples come from other worker co-ops. That's one of the sort of strongest ways that I think people are really hungry. They're hungry to learn from other co-ops and how they do things, but also that's where some of the messages really land. So we can share how Equal Exchange organizes a board meeting and then share a board meeting template for them to use, or how South Mountain Company shares their financial information, what their indicators are. And they can take that and say, okay, what are our indicators? And these are the ways in which we'll share this back to our members. Similarly, how Arizmendi Bakery will do its new member orientation, and we'll take that and say, here are some key topics you might want to cover, and here's a timeline for it. So we're really trying to, I don't use this word very much, but drill down into what are some of the management competencies that people are hungry for, particularly thinking about the needs and interests of people who are converting from a conventional company to a worker co-op. And some of the early questions are about who makes what decisions and what are the rights that people have and responsibilities. And so really sort of starting with some of those questions and how they can clarify that with very specific methods and tools in their co-ops. I think the other thing I just want to say is that it's in the context of the heart, which is, as Erin said, putting people first, and orienting in that way. And then we also really center the understanding of power and the power that is historically given to management, how that needs to shift, and who holds power in different ways inside the company. Thank you.
I heard a few things I just want to pull out, and then before we move to the next question, I sensed someone else may want to speak, but the question of power, love, and community, bringing the best out in people, education is intended to be a transformative experience. What makes us better is we learn something new. And when we learn something new, we get better at whatever it is. And it enlivens our spirit and makes us more able to enter the world with full agency. And I think that sort of undergirds our common attempt to bring more cooperation into the world. So I wanted to bring that up and really reference that it may be an ecosystem that we are all part of, that we're doing it in different ways, but it's similar soil that we are cultivating. And to understand that we may, to continue with that metaphor, we may be planting different vegetables in the garden, but we're tending a beautiful garden. And so I just want us to think about that, because I was surprised to hear Neil speak about the heart, love and care, when my sense about what the machinists had done in Maine was all about political education. But he quickly said how much that builds people's agency, and it makes them a better human being to have power in their market, in their industry, in their work. And what happens in work, it's one of the things we do in our everyday is we go to work. And so how do we bring agency? I saw Felix's hands go up, and I want to also transition with whatever you're going to say. Know that the next question I'm aiming us to spend the next moments on is about the pedagogy and how we assure some kind of inclusion and diversity in how we present, which again happens mostly because we are an ecosystem. No one of us can do it all. So I want to sort of turn, Felix, take it where you want. Thank you.
So this is great because basically, for me, in the way we're looking at this from the training collective perspective, is this how do we weave these three concepts together? Because they cannot just be one standalone in order to integrate the education that the community and people that are learning from other worker owners want to hear this. So because I immediately go through those, I did a drawing, which is a little world with the two hearts and the hands holding it up. Because for me, it's this construct about this happens in tandem. It doesn't happen separately in order to really engage the community, because for us, we're learning that we have people in the community that become teachers eventually in this process, and they're bringing their experience, and that becomes more valuable in order to do any of the conversions or people that are coming in to create a business for the first time and looking at the co-op movement and the model. So it becomes really rich because we do that political education, but we do it from the construct of also where you are, because we're working with people that are coming from other countries, different age groups, intergenerational constructs around co-ops, coming from countries where co-ops don't have the model that is here in the United States. And it's very sometimes challenging to create those spaces. So we bring that kind of space, and we're also acknowledging that people learn very in different ways. We do theater, we do, one of the biggest learning experiences for me was understanding also, as we bring these communities together, how to work with disability and language in many of the spaces. Because, working with people that have different capacity of communication is really important in creating a movement that is all-encompassing. And disability framework in this work is really important for us as we continue to grow a movement that has that kind of educational flexibility to incorporate many of our communities that are usually disenfranchised when we talk about who has access to education.
I sensed Omar had something to say and want to pitch it over in your direction. You're muted.
I always have something to say. So this is what was on my mind, is actually how there is, for us, in terms of our pedagogy, our approach, we are absolutely 100% experiential. And that all of the approach we take is that all of the 7 cooperative principles are things that we imbue and embody by having people actually do them within our academy. So we certainly don't, we don't, I try to avoid as much as possible lecturing, though it's incorporated and it's in there. But, we really rely on a lot of activities that enable people to actually get going and get involved. And at something underneath is that, particularly because we're of our focus, really focusing in on low-income communities of color, that there is just a huge amount of there's a lot of things that we have to work through within our own community, and that make it especially harder to launch a business, and even to do it as a co-op, but to launch a business. So when we talk about just access to capital is one that's well known and well discussed. And so having if you come from a community that's poor, that has less access to capital. Less access to capital is also related to having less contacts, less resources. And so, but there are other things that can be done. So really building on the social capital that exists, and just working with what you have, which is the whole basis of working as a cooperative, pooling your resources and making that happen. So, one of the things that we would do, which we can't do now because we're under COVID, and so our learning environment is different and it's on Zoom. But one of the things we used to do is when we'd have everybody together, we'd have each team, each startup co-op take turns providing food for everybody. Which for all of the teams, when they first come in and they hear, it's like, oh my God, you want me to bring food for all of these other people? Wait a minute, that's not going to work. But you say, you'll figure it out, you'll make it work. And you'll tap on other people if you need to, and ask if you need to, but you'll figure out a way to make it work, and people make it work. And then the process of everyone bringing in food, for each other just changes. It creates a whole new environment, and they're looking out for each other. They get into conflicts. Well, I cook better than you do. What is this? You brought pizza? Wait a minute. I cooked lasagna. So there's conversations and dialogue and discussions and debates, and all of those things happen within the process. But that is just one of those ways where make it a point to put people into the practice, and getting people to actually step up. Make presentations. We rely heavily on going out and talking to potential customers, and doing tons of interviews. So those are things that are really about getting people out there, but at the same time, building up the competencies and the strengths, and at the end of the day, the confidence that allows you to say to yourself, what, yeah, I've been living with this feeling that I'm not enough, that I don't know enough, I don't have enough in order to be able to launch this business. But I've been able to actually make these presentations on a consistent basis to all of these people. I've provided food for, way more people than I thought I could. I've interviewed, 100 people, and I didn't think that would happen. And I've got now this network, this connection of other people who look just like me and come from a background similar to me, and they're doing amazing things. So I'm going to do amazing things, and we're going to figure out how to do amazing things together, because they've just offered me, this group over here just offered me some resources, and this other one over here has connections that are going to help out. So there's just a power in working together that we all, people talk about, and we get excited about, and we see the power of cooperatives in doing that. And so it's important to put that same spirit and that principle into the approach that we take in our pedagogy, in education, bringing that same cooperative ideal. I'll stop there.
Can I build from there? Because I love the theme of this sort of like co-creating. Like I find, especially because at St. Mary's, we're a formal education institution, people think, okay, this is going to be what I'm used to, which is I show up in a class environment online and someone's going to impart knowledge on me. And it's very interesting when the shift happens to actually, we're all building ourselves up together. And that's what I loved about some of the things you were saying, Omar, is, not only are we co-created in the sense that every single lived experience that people are bringing into the course is just as valuable as what the instructor or the academic articles or, the clip that we're watching from TED Talks or whatever it is that week. but that folks are also learning from that lived experience of people wrestling with what are the theories and case studies that I'm looking at in class, and how is that applying then to my own cooperative knowledge. And so I love this idea of like co-creating the knowledge and building forward. So our approach is a cohort approach, meaning that we start with actually normally an in-person 5-day orientation in Halifax on campus, and then folks all go back to work, and then they're doing their studies part-time while they're still working full-time, but they're on a track to go through the programs together. So, you know, they're in modules together and they're learning the same things at the same times. And so they're able to compare and learn from everybody else in their class too. But also that we're looking at case studies from the sector, not just the folks in the class. We're looking at what works and what doesn't work, because I think there's lots to be learned from both. We're looking at co-ops and non-co-ops to see, okay, what's there to glean or contrast. And folks are also looking at their own living lab as their co-op or their co-ops, because lots of people have many hats. And they're going back and saying, okay, I'm going to really interrogate my own organization. I'm going to learn how to read the financial statements. I'm going to look at how we do governance. I'm not in marketing, but I'm going to darn well learn how we do marketing, what our approach is, and then be able to help elevate and nudge my own organization forward through my own learning. And so, you know, I think that's a really active part of the program, is that it's bridging academia, theory, and applied and practical. I'll leave it at that.
And can I jump really quickly, because I wanted to say that this has been really one of the ways in which in the work that I do also as an interpreter and language justice work, in which I've been very successful and developing forums to actually enhance this work. Right now we're doing, because of COVID-19, we had to shift into doing what is being called virtual language pods, which are educational pods for people that have different levels in language in Spanish, and they come together and do this learning, and they all teach a lesson and they all learn to work, and it creates a structure of that kind of a capacity that everybody's a teacher, and there's no one individual that is teaching one piece, and we have a common goal to work together. So that collective learning process is really essential for many of the co-op worker owners and people that are building this kind of economy.
I'd like to jump in, if I could.
Please.
So questions of pedagogy, always so interesting, and there's a lot to glean from this. We think about starting with what people are wanting to know, right? And understanding where they are at in their knowledge and their interests and their needs. So we do a democratic management skills assessment. It's a pretty simple assessment that lays out what are some traits that are needed in a democratic workplace and what are some skills, so people can see where they might want to improve or learn, or what does the business need right now. We have developed a framework. A lot of people have frameworks for what makes up a democratic organization, but we have four, we describe it as building a house. And so there are 4 sort of posts that need to be in place about sharing financial returns, sharing power, sharing information, and developing people. And so we present the framework, but then within those 4 posts go much deeper into each of them. In terms of skills building and storytelling from other cooperatives. We do a lot with scenario discussions, examples from existing cooperatives and challenges that come up, and how would people address them in terms of sharing decision-making or power, or how to sharing financial information, different ways of doing that. We have opportunities for reflection individually, in groups, breakout groups, and then action planning and implementation. So that's sort of the framework for the courses that we offer. They are webinars, they're in-person crash courses, they're certificate programs, and it's direct business consulting. So in all those different ways, we can get at different levels or depth related to each of those, sort of related to our framework. Stop there.
I love that, and I want to turn attention for our audience to know that in the tabs there are resources, and I believe we're also placing there resources from Democracy at Work. That is that what you referenced, the skills assessment, which is sort of like a 1 or 2 pager checklist, which is a good way sort of to do Myers-Briggs light in this world. which is like, what skills do I have? And you can also say, what skills do my team have? And I remember we did something like that. I went through Green Worker Academy a few years ago with my co-op then, and we did something like that. You want to assess yourself, you want to assess your team in according and against the metrics that matter. I'm gonna open it up again with a fresh question, but one of the things is I wanted to sort of bring out is the notion of storytelling. So somewhere along the way, and someone can affirm this in the chat if you know, I was told that data in Latin is plural for stories. Now we always say, show me the data, and you want to see the numbers and the charts and all, you know, show me the numbers, very, very metric oriented. But perhaps in our ancestral brain, the way we learned was listening to each other and telling stories. It's why I wanted to make sure we bring up, for example, and I know when we teach, sometimes using a case study or having somebody tell their story, it's what people walk around with. It's that notion of learning by experiencing in our brain a story rather than, you know, measuring it up against charts. So I wanted to see if there are stories that any of you want to bring forward in answering this or future questions. And the next line of question I want to do was really that whole notion of knowledge, skills, and values, right? When I was teaching carpentry and I was teaching people how to install drywall, I'm just teaching them how to install drywall. I'm not really going into why are we using drywall rather than plaster and what's the best way to look at, you know, the knowledge of what makes our walls. That's another conversation that might happen in architectural school, but we can integrate all those things when we're teaching anything or not, right? Are we teaching a skill? Are we teaching knowledge? And the value part is so important in our work as people who are trying to promote cooperation in a world that has been hyper-capitalized. And we still have to function within a world of capitalism that sort of says, can you make it work financially in this metric? But can we also look at other ways that we are bringing value, and what values do we want to impart and promote? So for the next few minutes, I want to open it up to this conversation about knowledge, skills, and values, and really how we transform people in teaching any one or three of those things. Who would like to jump in as a starting point?
Sure, I'll start.
Stacey.
Again, I see kind of my work is slightly different in that I'm not necessarily in my teaching reaching those who are starting cooperatives immediately. But one story that I think is a success story is, as I said, I teach the Solidarity Economy course that I designed, and it's really to kind of bring people on board to alternative economies, right, and the potential for cooperatives. And so I had a student that after we finished the project, and so we do a lot of the reading, and then we work with organizations in Chicago that have reached out and need something. They need a feasibility study, they need a business plan, and I bring the students on that project. And so one of my students, after he graduated, he did some work for a year, and now he's an alderman in Chicago, right? And if you know anything about Chicago, you know that the aldermen have a lot of power, right? They have their little fiefdoms. And so about, I guess it was before COVID, he reached out and said, I learned a lot in the class, and I'd love to think about what collective economics looks like in my ward. What would that look like to really promote and advocate for for various changes along the corridor, or to really get to bring to city council, you know, he's the alderman or city councilman, bring to the council this idea that we should be investing in cooperatives. And so, you know, they brought me in to speak to other councilmen that then speak to the mayor, right? And so while they are not necessarily starting the cooperatives, they are now speaking about cooperatives in a myriad of ways, as an opportunity for, you know, workforce development is the term they like to use. But prior to that, people have not really been talking about cooperatives, at least on the ground, absolutely. But in terms of in City Hall, not so much. And so this to me is an example of like building public awareness and normalizing cooperatives alongside other businesses. And, you know, so I'll just keep doing that work. I'll turn it.
Go ahead, Neil.
Hi.
Thank you.
So part of our whole education process is helping people make connections between the different parts of their lives. You know, why does politics matter? Because it impacts regulation. Why regulation matters, impacts their livelihood, the ability to run a business. And a few years ago, the Army Corps of Engineers announced that it was going to dredge Penobscot Bay. And instead of dealing properly with the contaminated soil, the Army Corps wanted to basically dump this toxic waste in some prime lobster beds, which for the people who live in that area, it would have destroyed their livelihood. And we said, okay, we're going to take on the Army Corps, which these lobstermen are used to being independent, looked at us like we were totally crazy. And then we said, and we're going to work with the environmentalists. And they looked at us like, you're really crazy. We don't like the environmentalists. And because that's what their industry had always told them, that environmentalists were their enemy. And so we got the lobstermen actively engaged, talking, lobbying their politicians, talking in their community, work with environmental groups and other groups. And we defeated the Army Corps of Engineers and what they were planning to do. And that was learn, you know, we told them these are the skills you need. This is what you need to do. We helped them do it. But they owned what they were doing and they saw the success. And it's like, wow, they actually see that coming together in a co-op and in a union, they actually have this power to influence their lives and their communities. And if you know rural Maine, is these towns were all dying and disappearing. And so this hands-on experience really helped them sort of learn and see why what they're doing makes sense. And between the union part of what they do helps them, you know, with all the sort of community building stuff, and the fact that they now have this business that's a major player in the industry, they get a lot of attention now as, oh, we're talking to you because you're a business and you have all this influence and you're doing millions of dollars of sales, and you're now, you know, those two things overlap and mesh, and the learning through experience has been really valuable and has helped build on, you know, more success builds on success.
Anybody else want to jump in on this? I appreciate that story as both an environmentalist and a unionist, and knowing that we have to make these connections, and that becomes one of knowledge and values. And then all of a sudden you can get a little deeper, and thank you, Neil.
I think that, hi, this is Felix. I think for me that, you know, I want to piggyback a little bit on what Rebecca was saying, that for us it's very important also to see where people are in terms of doing that kind of build up, because a lot of our work, you know, we mix stuff like theater from the press, you know, public education that actually engage people in ways that they feel that they're part of the process, as opposed to do this kind of lecturing and kind of work. And for example, we were doing an activity in which we're noticing that we're doing something in line, and all of a sudden we realize, oh, we have a number of people here that cannot be standing up. How are they going to be part of something that they don't have mobility? And how do you adjust that? And you bring it back to the group, and the group said, oh, they're going to participate this way, and this is how, and they agree. So they created a space of how to learn within the construct of their own community, and they become the problem solvers as opposed to us being always the problem solvers, because they have those skills. So, you know, shifting that idea that we give power because people have power already. It's how to recognize it and use it in a way that connects everybody. So it's really a way that we have found very useful in doing some of these trainings, because we go from everything about looking at your country and where you're coming from and the background you come and you're learning and what you're trying to create in your community right now.
Thank you, Felix. I think that's such an important notion. I want to sort of turn our attention and grab everything we've been speaking about and really identify what does inclusion look like. And the room isn't big enough ever to include everybody, right? So sometimes diversity means different. Let's do it this way here, let's do it that way here, and in the end, everybody's been included. I don't know if there's a wrong way or a right way. There certainly are oppressive ways that we want to exclude, but we also want to set up empowering ways that may be unique and different. the example of language access is such an important one that unless we were the United Nations with all the resources and all of the technology, we can't translate for everybody in one moment. But how do we start to pay attention to that? When I was preparing this workshop, Felix and I got on the phone, and the first question he asked was, how many languages is the conference going to be held in? And that's such a genuine question. But it's not on the foreground of all of our heads. And that right away breathes in something of access. Zoom, I mean, really, the tipping point of cultural change in the past 6 months has been so significant to see how many people are getting on, but also how many people get left out. So I just want to sort of let us look at the question of inclusion and diversity and how are we approaching that, and also maybe how you're not approaching it, but you're relying on this broader ecosystem, which is a little bit of gratitude to each one of us for doing something different and maybe not all the same. So Erin, your hand went up, so I'll let you start and then you can pitch it.
Yeah, well, one of the ways that I frame it is, what do people see as fixed and what do people see as fluid? And I find with our approaches to our cooperative, sometimes we think that some things are very fixed. If you went back in time 50 years ago, hiring practices looked a certain way. And the idea that you would prioritize BIPOC folks, that you would prioritize, age categories or representation, that wasn't even part of the conversation so much yet, or certainly not part of common practice. So to think that those are ways that we really acknowledge that our organizations are people driven, I think are really positive ways to at least be challenging ourselves. We've had a series of webinars and also private conversations with our students too about what inclusion looks like in their co-ops, how we're teaching. We challenge ourselves on that in our teaching all the time when students say, we're seeing a very white history of co-ops talked about. There must have been people of color in there, what the heck, And whether that means that they weren't formalized or named that way or included in the movements of the time doesn't mean that they aren't valid. And an important part that all of us understand in our history, so that especially people of color, Indigenous folks, can look and say, no, this is in my roots too. This is part of who I am and how my, the people on whose shoulders I stand, this is how they organize themselves too. But I think the fluid versus fixed also comes into how we run the structure of our co-ops. And, a couple examples I think of, we had students from grocery co-ops in our master's programs who said, okay, wait, I'm starting to see how important the voice of the employees and workers are. We are a consumer co-op, but do we have to run ourselves that way? Could we have more worker voice in the running of the business, on the board and so forth? And so what they ended up doing was learning from other people in their cohort and from some of our case studies on multi-stakeholder co-ops to say, wait, we could have their voice formalized into the running of the organization at the governance level. And so they actually restructured their co-op to be a multi-stakeholder co-op with workers at the table. We also had a couple gentlemen from a credit union in Nigeria come to executive education training that we did a couple years ago. And a lot of them had, very traditional business education. And they came up to me after the training to say, we've been selling our members things they don't need. We've been trying to make money like the business schools say to do, like good is in business. But we haven't been member focused at all. We've been just trying to drive those numbers on the spreadsheet, not realizing that we're member owned. We should be member driven and member focused, but we're trying to upsell people on things that aren't good for them and their households. Like, we had never considered that before. And so it's just phenomenal to see some of those things that people see as fixed way of doing things, start to integrate more diverse ways of understanding it and therefore taking action on it. I'll end there.
Omar, did you want to speak next? Did I pick that vibe, or we can pitch it?
That vibe is always there, but we can go on to another question.
Well, remember what I really wanted to let this session, and we'll be winding down in a few minutes, so maybe we will convert this to our last go around even, because the general topic is, again, inclusion, diversity, and equity. And there are so many ways we can repair the world and do that in little things and big things. So we're building this ecosystem. We're all educating in different ways. I watched myself move into the university setting through workforce development. And I said, we need to do some non-credit education. And that quickly became helping the New York City network of worker co-ops develop a training collective of worker owners who could do more training of more people who were becoming worker owners or trying to strengthen their company. It's sort of like after people go through green worker, now they need some ongoing professional development in that space. Who delivers it? And we were really trying to breathe into that space. The delivery comes from the lived experience. Let's do that. So, and that's one thing. And now at the university, we're actually developing credit-bearing courses, not unlike what Stacy's doing in Chicago, and assembling those courses into a packet that we'll be submitting for a certificate in cooperative economies. I believe, like many other people, it's interdisciplinary. This can be happening everywhere. Teaching co-ops in different ways, how we do it, where we do it. So in this final go-round, we'll let everyone speak a little bit about, what are you hearing from each other that's similar and different? And where do you see yourself and others breathing in this notion of inclusion? And then I'll turn to you, Omar, let you start.
Maybe I'll start just to piggyback on what you just said. Because one thing I noticed, just a little bit about me, prior to doing my degree, my doctorate in urban planning and sociology, I did an MBA. So I come from that, worked in private sector, that sent me back to school to not do that, right? And I think because we're talking about co-ops, which are essentially businesses, the tendency is to think about MBA programs, right? However, if we're really thinking about inclusion, and the challenge there is really trying to change the value system of those who go through those programs so that you can apply the analytical skills to what we're actually doing. Another strategy is to start with students who have analytical skills, but they also have those values, which are part of those programs, right? Whether it's a public administration program, a planning program, a labor studies program. So, in terms of the resources that we're tapping into, I think we might want to think more broadly. And I'm not saying that to suggest, reach out to me in my program, but I realize that, yeah, we keep thinking about MBAs, and they come with a set of skills, but there are other schools and other disciplines that are trying to build cooperatives as part of the ethos of the program, because it aligns with the values of, at least the purported values of the program. So I think that's important work that you're doing at CUNY, and it's happening all in different places.
We can go around in our order, and from there I'll pitch it to Neil.
So one difference, so we're a very rural-based co-op movement where where most other panelists are in urban areas. So there's not a lot of diversity in these small port towns and islands. We certainly, for women members being engaged and participating and having leadership roles, that's part of what we promote. But one of the things that was sort of interesting is in 2014, a Democratic Mark Minchon was running for governor, and he was an openly gay man, and getting our members to vote for a Democrat and someone who was openly gay was totally foreign to them, and getting them to move beyond their comfort zone, which is a lot of what inclusion and diversity is, getting people out of their comfort zone, was a very significant victory that we had among our membership, that they could see, oh, it's about how does a politician affect our business, our co-op, our fishing, as opposed to, oh, is he a gay man or is he a Democrat? And, that was important change in how people view the world.
I've noticed my timekeeping's a little off. We may have a very hard stop in 2 minutes. So anyone who wants to jump in with a couple of moments of taking it, and we'll take it longer if we're granted the moments in the conference. Anybody want to jump in?
For me, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
Go for it, Felix.
For me, this speaks a lot about the ecosystem and the process that we're working with very different communities and how that we create the spaces to support each other. Because it's really difficult to work in the silos sometimes and be either trapped in academia or be trapped just in community organizing, because they're all very much systemic and do not allow fluidity. And how do we construct a place where the ecosystem allows for growth of all these processes to create different system of economy that actually allows our communities to thrive? I'm really beyond survival. We need to be able to work on thriving and growing within our communities. And I think recognition of all these differences of approaches will serve a lot of that process without saying, because we're using, and I used to do a lot of the Audre Lorde trainings. We're using the master's tools to deconstruct a system, economic system that many times doesn't work for us. And how do we do it that in a way that is creative and allow us to then really create space of growth and going beyond just survival?
Thanks. I think we've hit our 75 minutes that we are allotted for this workshop. So what I want to do is just graciously thank everybody. I think this was just the tip of the iceberg of this ecosystem that we create. I'll do a little this, which is our little heart. Thank you very much for bringing your heart to this space. Everybody who's witnessing this in October at the conference, please use the tabs. Please use the conference website to get more contacts from all of us. We're all going to place things there for you. We're going to now port back in time travel to September 18th and say goodbye to those people who are in the future, October 6th. And thank you, everybody, so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.